you don't mind everyone hearing them, we'd be happy to answer them from up front. If you want some privacy, I'd be happy to continue to meet with you. We're going to be here through Sunday. Lots of things going on. Rick, you got a picture here for our Facebook, social media. Everyone likes Facebook. If you would like to know more about the ministry that we do at HeartWise, we are a freestanding health ministry based in Chattanooga, Tennessee. You can go to our website, heartwiseministries.org. And on that site, we've had probably 300 or 400 radio programs that we've done through the years. The radio program that we produce is called HeartWise with Charles Mills. And we just got on in Singapore. And I was wondering, well, what could we do to interest people in Singapore? A country of about 4 or 5 million. And so I started studying about their health. Did you know in Singapore, there's no drugs in Singapore? They don't have a drug problem at all. If they have drug problems in Singapore, they're executed. So, that sort of has done away with that problem. There's very little smoking in Singapore. And smoking is going to be a pretty big worldwide problem. It's estimated that right now there are 1 billion smokers in the world. In the United States, there's still 20% smokes despite everything that's been done. And we think in the next 20, 30 years, if God doesn't come and take us home, that China is going to have some severe health problems from smoking cigarettes. They're probably the country that smokes the most at this point, China. There's a lot of smoking going on in China. So you're surprised. So anyway, getting back to the Singapore group. So I said, well, do they smoke in Singapore? Well, they don't smoke much in Singapore either because they tax the cigarette so heavy that it's very expensive. In Singapore, about 19 to 20% of people are Christians. They speak English there. So I'm still trying to figure out, well, what could I get in Singapore to interest them? Oh, I said, well, maybe they eat a lot of fast food in Singapore. No, they don't eat much fast food. Fast food is taxed very high. They sort of run a socialized program. But then I found out in Singapore, they have 125 cell phones per each 100 persons. So that was an entry point. Let me do a program. Let's do some programs about cell phones and social media. Did you know right now in the world, in the whole world, there are estimated 7 billion cell phones or mobile devices. There are more mobile devices than there are people in the world right now. And did you know that 5 billion of those are in underdeveloped countries? So next year, HeartWise is really going to try to plug into that and use every mean we can to reach the masses. We're going to try to develop our first app, because that seems the way everyone likes to communicate now is on these cell phones. But anyway, in researching the cell phones, I found out that the average person in the United States, that is, spends 7.6 hours on a screen a day. That's why this moving is such a big deal. And cell phones create a lot of health problems, okay, that we're just now beginning to discover. The number one health problem with the cell phone, guess what it is? Yes, accidents and driving. Number one cause, okay? Number two cause is immobility. People just don't move. They're on the phone all the time. Number three, we haven't proven yet, but I think all those inputs on the cell phone can't be good for a brain long term. I think they get downloaded into the subconscious, and sooner or later, the subconscious mind is going to get inflamed and reject all this stuff they're putting in, and it's going to be a problem. But it also causes eye strain. It's been reported in very young children, their brains aren't developed, and some of the radiation can actually get through if they hold it up to the ears. So we encourage people to keep cell phones as far away from them as can. Try to stay off the phone, and if you have to be on it, do it while you're walking. you know. But anyway, I thought that was interesting in Singapore, so I really tried to talk to them about the importance of having a little diversity and not so much screen time. Now this group, does anyone have a cell phone here?
Yes.
Okay. Who doesn't have a cell phone? Let's put it that way. Oh, congratulations. But cell phones this is going to be the new way to reach the world, at least underdeveloped. They have cellular phones in Africa where they don't even have any other means of communication. They don't have computers, they don't have TV, they don't have radios, but everyone has a cell phone. Around the world, cellular services are much cheaper than in the United States. In the underdeveloped world, it runs about $5 to $10 a month, I hear. They're very inexpensive, but then guess what they do? Everyone has one, so the advertisers really hit hard on everyone that has it, so they can sort of control, they market that way. And everyone likes these things. Have you heard this word, gone viral? It's amazing. If we need to figure out ways to make good Christian things go viral, so people will start thinking, but so far all the viral stuff I see is almost like slapstick. It's not really, you know, people like that funny stuff, and I don't know. We'll have to see how that goes. Well, anyway, now that everyone's settled down, we'll go ahead and talk about our second seminar. And remember, what I wanted you to bring away, the take-home lessons from seminar number 1 was this. The cause of chronic disease is probably stress. Stress comes from many different ways. We have to look for stresses in our lives, the stresses that we can do something about, as well as the stresses we don't know about, and we try to find ways to lower our stress at all levels. And that's where we come to looking to the scriptures, biblical prescriptions for life, understanding that the key to lowering stress, as we're going to learn about tomorrow, the key to lowering stress, the absolute solution to stress, is going to be in worship in our relationship with God. And we now have evidence-based medicine, evidence-based studies to prove this. But today I want to, last session we talked about one thing that you could do to lower your stress right away. Does anybody remember what it was? Deep breathing. Now, we have a problem here right now over the next 30, 40 minutes right now. We have got a lot of carbs in our bodies, a lot of carbs. We are going to start pumping out some insulin in our body. Those dopamine receptors are going to be sort of feeling good in our brain. And the next thing we're going to do is to get sleepy. So if you have to nod off, that's okay. Just take a short one. The words are still getting in there. Whether what they're doing, I don't know. But remember, even when you're asleep, you can still get inputs into your brain. You can, even when you're asleep. We don't know what they do. We don't know whether we're able to bring them up to the consciousness or not. But every input we get gets stored in the big storage engine, the hippocampus. So if you have to nod off, that's okay. I'll try to make this a little bit shorter, a little bit easier to understand. But we're going to delve into some more biblical prescriptions for life. I'm sort of preaching to the choir right now because most of you know this material. But I'm hoping I can spin it in a new way, or you can think of ways you can present this to your friends and neighbors to help them improve their health. So as we talk about this, hopefully you'll realize that this is basic material, but we chose these because most people don't do these things. And it would help if I would turn this on. So what is a biblical prescription for life? Well, as you heard last presentation, I like to go back to and find a scripture, and anyone can do this now that we have all this media. Find a scripture and see, and go back and look at the randomized studies. I use PubMed, but there's many others back, and see which studies would back this up. I have one, and we have made these 1-minute spots that people are putting on social media, and I think 3 Angels Broadcast, Trinity Broadcast Network are running these 1-minute spots where we talk about a biblical prescription for a minute. We give the science behind it and try to talk about how a person can apply it to their lives to change their physiology. The one I'm working on this month It's not very popular. But I went back and saw in the Bible several texts where working and being active and having a job is a good thing to do. So what I'm going to do is find the biblical prescription that says work and being active and doing things helps change the chemistry. Because I've noticed in my practice that when people age, if they don't have a purpose and do things, they get older quicker. The Bible, has numerous texts about, God has a purpose. We must keep going and doing things. And I'm hoping each one of us here come out of here inspired by ways that we can plug into God's will. And what does He want us to do as we end time together? But anyway, I'm still looking for the research. There's not a lot of scientific articles done about showing how work helps the body. So I'm still looking for a good study. So if anyone ever finds a good study, let me know. Let me know, because I'm still looking for that to make a biblical prescription about how work and doing things and not just laying around is a good thing to do. But I need a scientific study on that. So we're going to talk about biblical prescriptions. That's what a biblical prescription is. We take a text, we try to find the evidence behind it, but even if we can't find the evidence behind it, we know it's true because it's in God's Word. So even if we can't find it yet, we know someday that's going to be true. And that's what amazes me about people that did these things from the Bible 200 years ago. They didn't have all this evidence, and yet things that were said years ago, there's nothing in here that's brand new or mine. This has all been said many, many times before. But as we reach out to our friends and neighbors with health evangelism, it's how we package the truth. If the truth is packaged in love and given the right way, I find people are more accepting of it. And this is the same truth we've had for many, many years. It's just now everyone's concerned about health now. It seems like it's on everyone's forefront because we see chronic disease rising. We see a society that can't pay for it, and everyone is tired of being sick, and they're looking for answers, and they're starting to realize that modern medicine has its place, but it's really not solving a problem. So let's talk about some biblical prescriptions tonight. Isaiah 43:20. Because I give waters in the wilderness and rivers in the desert to give drink to my people, my chosen. Well, I use this text to let know that water is a biblical prescription for life. But remember, we talked about how biblical physical prescriptions help our spiritual lives. And we're going to learn more about how as our body's healthier, our brain becomes healthier, our stress chemistry is turned off, we develop neurons and neural connections in the prefrontal cortex that allow us to communicate with God better. There's a part of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex that when we worship, it gets bigger and it's able to turn off stress chemistry. Well, why do we choose water? Did you know that in the United States today, about 75% of people at some level are dehydrated? Which brings me to the story of Kenny. I met Kenny about 4 or 5 years ago, and he was in the best of health, an avid bike rider. Do we have any cyclists here? Cycling is sort of addicting, isn't it? Yeah, once you want to go and go and go. Well, Kenny was addicted to cycling, and in Chattanooga, we have a lot of people that do road racing and triathlons and these numerous strong physical activities. Well, Kenny on a Sunday morning was going to go from Dalton, Georgia, to Cleveland, Tennessee on a bike ride. And he was going to go by himself. And how many miles is that, Rick? Rick's really good with that kind of stuff. Whoa, how did you know that? Perfect. Where's Rick at? He is no longer needed. 50 miles. Well, he was planning a 50-mile bike ride that day. And he left on his bike and he forgot to pack water. Okay? And he was about 24, 25 years old. And Kenny started this ride, and it was in summer and it was hot. But he started pretty early. But he was going the back roads. If you've ever lived in that area, the back roads don't have a lot of traffic. But all of a sudden, about halfway into the ride, his chain came off. His chain came off his bicycle, and he had to sit there and repair it. No water. No water. It took him a lot of time. And by then, it's getting into the later part of the day. It's starting to get hot and humid in the summertime. Well, it's getting hot and humid, and he's still exercising. His metabolism goes up. His temperature starts to rise, and the body needs water to bring down our temperature. We're set very narrow regulatory with regards to our temperature. So anyway, he's riding, and then all of a sudden, he gets back on his bike. He starts really having problems. He starts not feeling good at all, and about 3 or 4 miles after he fixed his chain, boom, he fell over on the side of the road. Well, a good Samaritan came on the road there and picked him up and called 911. They got the ambulance there to him. And now remember, this is a guy that's perfectly healthy. He exercises tons. He didn't get enough water. By the time he got to the emergency room, his temperature was 104 degrees. 104. He was dehydrated like you would not believe. I've never seen a case that's this bad. I got consulted on the case sort of later on the case because he went into heart failure. The reason he went into heart failure was because his kidneys shut down because there was no water. So the kidneys start failing, everything else starts to fail. He ended up going on dialysis. He developed a condition called metabolic acidosis because his metabolism changed. So just a few hours of that high temperature and a few hours of water was causing big problems. He wasn't thinking well. His blood pressure when he got to the emergency room was about 60/40. His heart was going about 170, making the stress chemistry that we talked about, and for him it was good, because that stress chemistry kept him alive until we could do everything modern medicine could to get his water back in his system. Now, Kenny did fine. He lived, okay? He didn't have any sequela. He was on dialysis for a few weeks. He developed a condition called rhabdomyolysis, where all the muscles get weak because of lack of water, and that muscle spills out into the bloodstream, damages the kidney. The kidney can't do its job. You get acidosis, makes the heart weak, went into heart failure. But it just emphasized the importance of water. Now, he was dehydrated in the worst way, but it's been estimated now in the United States that 7 of 10 people, to some degree, are dehydrated. And we talk about all these other big health issues, but drinking water is essential because a lot of our body is made up of water. And if we're not having enough water, as Kenny found out, a lot of stress chemistry gets turned on. But even if you're 5 or 10% down on water, you turn on the stress chemistry to some degree. And remember, what we want to do is we want to turn down stress chemistry so we do not activate chronic disease. So water is indeed a biblical prescription for life. We need water, but we also need to have living water. You see the correlation that God uses throughout Scriptures. Living water, real water. And we're going to talk about more as time goes on, about how God uses the physical and the spiritual and how they're interlinked. And as our spiritual life gets stronger, it helps us to see the things we need to do to make our body better. We want to make our body better so we can worship better, so we can serve God better. So water is a biblical prescription for life, and I'm going to pull out a water bottle here. Here's some interesting facts that might interest you. Did you know that lungs are 90% water? You know, 90% water. The blood is about 82% water. So you want to breathe better? Let's say you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, drink some water. You want to thin out your blood a little bit? Make sure you're not dehydrated. Remember, when you're dehydrated, the blood gets thick because 82% of your blood is water. It gets more sluggish. When it gets more sluggish, it can't carry oxygen to the needed organs. So water is very important. Did you know the brain is about 85% water? So a lot of people say when we get older, our thirst goes down. And we don't realize we need to drink more water. But water is one of the biggest important things that we can add to our regimen to slow down aging to help protect our memory. Everyone talks about all these memory aids, but let's do some basic things. Let's get oxygen to the brain. Let's give our brain the water it needs so the cells can function. It sounds pretty easy, But water is a biblical prescription for life, and I don't think we take it seriously or enough. Now, I'm preaching to the choir here. I see water on every table, almost. Every table is water. But this is not the case everywhere I go. Most places that I go, I see Coca-Colas and wine bottles and other things, everything but water. And we also get a lot of water in when we eat vegetables. Most vegetables, about 20% water. So skin is about 80% water. So you have itchy skin, you have a lot of rash, your skin doesn't look the way it does, you're starting to get wrinkles. Well, try drinking some more water. You're getting cramps in your muscles a lot. Well, muscle is 70% water. You get dehydrated, they're going to hurt more. So try to drink some water. In fact, the total body is about 60 to 70% water, depending on how much fat and other things you have. So it's been estimated 70% of people are dehydrated. Now, how do you know if you might be dehydrated? Well, some of the symptoms that Kenny showed, thinking becomes impaired. So let's say you get up in the morning, it's about 10 o'clock, and you're fuzzy. You're just not thinking good. Things aren't clear. Say, well, did I drink my water today? Think about that. Temperature rises because of the metabolism. Water helps control your temperature. Joint and muscle pains. If you have a lot of joint and muscle pains, well, ask yourself, 70% of my muscles water. Am I drinking enough water every day to hydrate and lubricate my muscles? Headaches. One of the leading causes of headaches in the United States is lack of water. This is the one I get all the time. Dry mouth and chapped lips. That's my sign that I need to drink a little bit more water. How about fatigue? The number one cause of fatigue in the United States is dehydration. So you're tired, you don't have any energy, well, try drinking some water. Water will actually speed up your metabolism. The bottom one, constipation. A lot of people get constipated just because they don't have water that keeps things moving through well. Water can also increase your cholesterol. We know it can make your kidney function worse because you need water going through your kidneys. And I see this quite a bit. People will come in on medications and wondering why their blood pressure used to be good, now it's going low. Their blood sugar, they're taking blood sugar medicine. All of a sudden the medicine is like working 10 times more effectively. Well, what happens is these medicines go through the kidney, they're metabolized there. They don't drink water for 3 or 4 days, and then the kidney function gets worsened. So the medicine, they're still taking that every day. A 10 milligram dose becomes a 40 milligram dose in a very short period of time. Since it's so much in the bloodstream, water can have extreme fluctuations in your blood pressure as well. It's very common sometimes when people go to nursing home or assisted living that they're on water pills. And I've probably seen this 4 or 5 times in the last month. They're taking water pills, but they're not drinking water. If you don't drink water or get sick for 3 or 4 days and still take the water pill, guess what happens? You get dehydrated. Grandma starts not thinking very well, gets confused, the blood pressure changes, not acting well, not thinking herself. They take her into the hospital and they say, oh, she's got dementia, she's got a urinary tract infection. But they never look for the reason why. These medicines literally dehydrate somebody. And when every cell in the body needs water, it's something that we have to pay attention for. Dehydration can provoke heart rhythm problems, blood clots user, and the urine gets dark. Now, these aren't made up. This is all from the National Institute of Health, and yet you never see public service announcements, very fewly, about the importance of drinking water. Seems pretty simple. So if that doesn't convince you to drink a little more water today or pay attention to it as a biblical prescription, it's the number one cause of daytime fatigue. Mild dehydration slows your metabolism up to 3%. So you want to lose weight? What's a way to do that? Drink some water. Speed up your metabolism. 1 glass of water also shuts down midnight hunger. 8 to 10 glasses can dramatically reduce joint and back pain. Have a bad back? Lots of people have bad backs. Make sure you're drinking enough water. Now, it's going to be hard for those that are flying home in a few days because, you get, stiff in those planes. You drink your water, then you sort of have to go to the bathroom. So you have to sort of use your best judgment at times. 5 glasses of water a day can lower the rates of colon cancer, breast cancer, and bladder cancer. Well, how does that happen? Well, they haven't worked through the mechanisms exactly. But remember, you don't drink water, it puts stress on the system. All the cells don't work right, things start to age, genetics and DNA starts to change. Just a 2% drop in body water slows your mental processes. 2%. You take a test, I tell the students that want to take the test, make sure you're hydrated. Maybe you can get 2% higher on your next test. 2%. Just by drinking water the day you're taking a test. So we talked about water. Let's give you some practical guidelines to make sure you're getting enough. I think the best one that I use in my life is when you urinate, it's clear. Okay? Or if you're running every 3 or 4 hours and have a bad prostate, that could be a sign that you're getting enough water too. Another way to do it is take your weight, divide it in 2, and that's about how many ounces you need. Let's say you weigh 200 pounds. So you need about how many ounces of water a day? 100. This has in it about 17 ounces. Okay, so you need about 5 of these a day. That's just as a baseline. Now, if you're metabolically active like Kenny was, he's going to need a lot more water during the day. If you're talking or burning up calories or you're doing a lot, you're going to need more. That's just about the baseline that you need a day of water just to keep things working at a baseline. So physical water literally changes every cell in your body. And if someone wants to know, I get a lot of questions, and if someone wants to know how I can do this or this or this, I always say, well, are you drinking enough water? Because it is almost a treatment for every condition that you can imagine, from heart disease to high blood pressure to joint pains to not thinking well at night. And then when let's say your neighbor comes over tomorrow and says, hey, listen, I'm having problems with my blood pressure. I'm tired all the time. What are you going to tell them to do? Drink some water. But then you're going to say, you know what? Not only do we have physical water, but if you heard anything about living water, would you like to know about living water to get at the cause of health? Would you like to learn about that too? They might say yes. You never know. But the physical and the spiritual are linked together. Let's talk about another biblical prescription for life here. Genesis 1, 3, and 4. Then God said, let there be, and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. So light is a biblical treatment for life. God gave us light. But notice we have light that improves our physiology, as I'm going to explain to you, but also we have the light of truth. Light of truth. And I'm sure our other speakers are going to give you more of that light today. Right, Pastor Reed? Yes. Going to talk about light. Where's Dr. McNulty? See here? He's going to talk about light. Pastor Bohr is going to talk about light, that truth. Because remember, when you have that light in your life, guess what? Your worship gets better, your brain gets better, the physiology of the brain gets better. When that gets better, it turns down stress chemistry, you make better decisions, and that's going to give you more power to plug into the physical aspects of light. Which brings me to Martha. Let's vote on this. Would you say that Martha is sad or depressed? Is there a difference? She's definitely not happy. Martha was a patient of mine, she still is, that we did an ablation. That's where they have an abnormal congenital heart rhythm that we now have the technology to go up in the heart and destroy these rhythms with sound wave energy. We can map it in the heart and find out exactly where it is, give a little sound wave and zap these genetically. She had one called supraventricular tachycardia that we got rid of about when she was probably in her late 30s. But she came to me at age 48, and she had this kind of face on her. And I said, what is wrong? And she says, I'm just really, really, really depressed. And my doctor wants to put me on a medication. And I said, well, what does he want to put you on? One called Lexapro. And I said, well, you've never been depressed before. I go, well, what's wrong? Let's not just treat a symptom, let's find out a cause. Well, in talking to her, she was 44 years old and had her third child 6 months before. A big surprise at age 44. Here's a question here, and I doubt that I'll get one hand come up, but we'll see. Has anyone in this room, only women can answer this question. If the men answer, we'll talk later. Has anyone at age 44 ever had a child in this room? None. Okay. Your mother did, okay. Well, it's not so easy for many different. Well, she had one and she wasn't prepared mentally. It was an accident. And after this one, she developed what we call a postpartum after birth depression. And her doctor, she went to her doctor, she was just not feeling good. It was the situations of life and other things. Well, I explained to her, I said, well, sometimes the situation of life sort of stress us. Our brain changes the chemistry, and sometimes we don't do things to do well. Before you start Lexapro, I want you to try a biblical treatment for 1 month. I want you to go, she wasn't going outside very much. I want you to go outside and just take a walk for 45 minutes a day. Just do that. I also measured her vitamin D level, which is very important to do in someone that might be depressed. It was 2. 2. So I said, well, why don't you start taking some vitamin D3 supplements, get out in the sunshine, and I explained that vitamin D is not a vitamin at all. It's a prohormone, and it's important for every cell of the body. And you're not activating this prohormone, and one of the things that this hormone does is help regulate your chemistry of depression via a chemical called serotonin. The highest rates of suicide in the world for many years was up in Alaska, because they had terribly low light exposure, low vitamin D levels, and they were killing themselves, and it was because they were so depressed because they didn't have any serotonin in the brain. That's something she needed. So after 1 month of taking vitamin D3 supplements, walking outside, guess what? She was back to her old self. Back to her old self, feeling good about life, coping with this new beautiful baby that she had. And now she stayed off Lexapro, and now she believes that light is indeed a biblical prescription for life. But not only did we were able to talk about how light changes the physical body, but I said, light in the Bible is something that God uses for truth. I'm the light of the world, the truth of the world. I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So maybe there's something also in having truth in Christ in your life that changes our physiology as well. And she said, well, maybe so. And she started studying her Bible, and guess what? Her depression even improved more. Let's talk about the benefits of light, the ones that are scientifically proven. Then I'm going to talk about the ones that we're investigating now. Of course, light activates the prohormone vitamin D, and light helps the brain do better via serotonin. It makes the bones stronger, and it makes the blood vessels better. Lower your blood pressure if you have a vitamin D level that's sufficient. Someone came up at break and had some osteoporosis problems, and I get this question quite a bit. My bones are old, they're not, they're going to break and that kind of stuff. And I said, well, they asked, what would be your treatment? I want to be put on a medicine. And sometimes people need medicines, but I said, who has the healthiest bones in the world? Elephants. And there's actually a text in the Bible that talks about the behemoth in the bones, okay? And think about what elephants do. They get outside a lot, okay? So they get a lot of vitamin D that helps their I don't know if it makes their bones super strong, but I never hear of elephants with osteoporosis or broken hips. They eat a lot of greens. They say elephants eat about 200 pounds of greens and bark a day. Well, I don't want to do the bark part, but the greens we know are filled with calcium that gets into the bones. They do a lot of walking a lot. They move around a lot. And this is why they don't have lots of problems with their bones. Well, nowadays, again, I harped on the sitting earlier, right? Okay. But if I asked everyone to stand up for an hour lecture, who would do it? Nobody. But if we want to protect our bones, we have to do things like that. Well, vitamin D is one way to protect our bones. Remember, our original plan was to be inside and not outside. Right? Good, you're listening. The original plan was to be outside and not inside. And what's happened over the last 200 years? We're inside all the time. You know, we work inside, we have conferences inside, but in the old days, it wasn't like this. We used to be exposed to the sun. The vitamin D levels were much higher. Also, another benefit is light helps our immune system. I was going back and reviewing some of the early days when they had the sanitarium systems. And those people didn't have antibiotics, and a lot of them had strep pneumonia at that time, a serious lung infection, and they would just treat them with diet, and one of the treatments they did was going outside in the sunshine. That, again, enhanced the immune system via vitamin D pathways, and guess what? They were able to treat infections at that time. So light helps our immune system. Staying inside hurts our immune system. So there's something that God has given us in the light that makes our body, keeps us healthy, and can be used as a treatment for disease. One of the other things that it helps is circadian rhythms. One of the persons that hurt us the most health-wise the last 200 years is a guy named Thomas Edison. Think about it. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Before that, we would go to bed at night, we'd get up and stay outside, but once that light bulb came along, we had electricity, guess what we did? We started to stay up later, we stayed in all the time, we didn't get as much light, it became more fashionable to stay inside. And guess what? Our circadian rhythm started to change. People did not sleep well at night. Well, there's something about the day-night cycle, the sun, that helps keep these circadian rhythms going well. There's a chemical in the brain called melatonin that's important for sleep. And we know that when we disrupt our circadian rhythms, this hormone gets thrown off. One of the worst things that disrupt our circadian rhythms now is television. Not only do we don't go outside, it continues to stimulate our brains, so we make some of these chemicals that keep us up. Remember, we were supposed to, when the sun goes down, the original plan was us to go down. Well, we violated this. This puts stress on our system. Stress over long periods of time turns on that stress chemistry, damages the body. So sunlight is a biblical prescription for light. Well, what does vitamin D deficiency do? How many people have it? This is why we talk about it. Remember, 75% no water. 25% of all adolescents, 1 in 4, are deficient in B vitamins. That's particularly crucial if you're young and have a developing brain. So if you have young children, young grandchildren, have them go outside and play. Get them outside and play. 33% of young adults, 1 in 3, have a vitamin D deficiency. 60% of hospitalized patients and 90% of the critically ill have a vitamin D deficiency. Something that really is pretty easy to treat. Now, these are the recommendations that they make in the literature suggesting how to replace vitamin D. But the simplest thing is if you can get a blood level, see what it is, and check it. And if it's below 20, you're starting to get low, depending on where you have it measured at. But if you're below 70 years of age, you need about 600 international units a day of vitamin D. 70 needs a little bit more. Others might need as much as 5,000 international units a day. Almost every person that comes to the hospital from a nursing home I see are severely vitamin D deficient. They don't get them outside. They stay inside. And almost none of them are on a D3 supplement. In the wintertime, I take 1,000 units of vitamin D3 every day because I know I don't get out very much. I get up early and go to the hospital. It's dark. I don't get home till it's pretty late. So I know I'm sort of vitamin D3 deficient. I wanted to see what my levels were, and it was 12. 12. So I started to take some vitamin D, and guess what? I didn't have as much cabin fever in the winter. It might have been a mental thing, but I felt like my bones started feeling better. I don't know, but my mood definitely improved. John 8:12. Then Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Amen. Another biblical, how the physical and spiritual are interrelated. Christ is the light of the world. He gives us this light. We're now having studies done that show light can now penetrate our deep organs. It doesn't stop at the skin. We have some evidence now that the light can penetrate things like the liver and trigger valuable chemical reactions just from being out in the sun. And if we're not doing that, we might be missing those chemical reactions. Technology is evolving, but who is going to do spending a lot of money on the importance of sunlight? Who's going to do that? Can you sell sunlight? No. But I'll tell you, and I want a show of hands, has anyone ever gone to the beach where they've got lots of fresh air, lots of rest, lots of sunlight, and felt worse? Oh, there's one person, yeah. I mean, you can stay out too late, of course. But the next time you're wanting to change your chemistry, think about that. Well, maybe I should take a vacation, a beach trip. Maybe I should get a little more vitamin D, maybe some fresh air. Maybe just breaking away, turning the stress of the world might be something good to do. And also, as we think about the physical light, we also want to think, again, about the spiritual light. I am the light of the world. This is very important. This is crucial to changing our entire physiology of the body. We're going to talk about nutrition for a second. Most of you know more nutrition than 99% of the people I talk to every day. But I'm going to go through some of the typical things I do in reaching out to people with nutrition. Because it's a very charged topic, you know. Some people that I see get so bogged down with their food choices that it stresses them, and the stress from the food choices damages the more body than eating it. I see that frequently. But remember, health is just not one thing, it's everything. It's everything. It's walking, it's water, it's being happy, it's having a good brain. Of course, worship we're talked about, but nutrition is an element. So let me talk a little bit about nutrition and how a way you might approach your friends if they want to know better. Well, the biblical prescription goes back to Genesis, and God said, "See, I've given you every herb that yields seed, every tree, and it shall be for food. Also to treat every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps in the earth, which is just life. I've been given every green herb for food." So basically that which grows, things that grow. So I tell people, the biblical prescription is try to eat things that grow. Eat things that grow. Well, people can, what if they don't really believe in the Bible? What's the science? Well, I talked to them about the first nutritional study that I found out was in Daniel. Remember Daniel and his friends? So Daniel, a young man, must have been pretty strong in this conviction. He went over to a foreign land and the king says, "Let's eat all the rich food." And I'm sure that was food that was high in fat, high in protein. And he says, "No, they call it pulse, but if you go back and look at it, the word is zeroim. And I don't know if I'm saying that, but the word in the Hebrew, that which is grown. So he said, "Well, let me eat things that just grow from the ground and see how I do." And after a short period of time, his countenance was better, and his group was found to be 10 times smarter. So this is important. Let's say the other guys weren't dumb. They had IQs, let's say, of 120. If Daniel was 10 times smarter, his IQ was probably about 1,200. No wonder they made him second in charge. But it wasn't, I don't think, entirely about the nutrition. I think it was also about the worship. I wish I could have done some studies on Daniel at that time just to see what the worship was doing to his brain as well. But I'm sure it was a twofold approach. So I've been thinking about nutrition through the years, and I get many questions on this. And I've gotten to work personally with some of the best in the country. I'm not a nutritionist, but these are the things I've taken home, and I think I'd like to share with you and see if it works for you. But the biblical prescription is to eat more plants. Now remember, they didn't have quite the selection back then that we have now. We almost have too much selection, too much to choose from. But I've sort of been recommending a whole food, plant-based diet to my patients. That's the direction we want to head. And here's some of the reasons, the scientific reasons behind it. To the right there is T. Colin Campbell, and I'm actually able to work with him on a daily basis. He published the book, The China Study, and this was one of the best nutritional studies that give evidence-based medicine to a plant-based diet. And he showed how the cancer rates and the heart disease rates in rural China were different and how things have changed. And he didn't go into this thinking that that was what he was going to find. So he got me really interested in the science of nutrition. He's in his, believe it or not, he's probably 85 now, okay? And he's still going strong. Well, he got me so interested, I started studying and learning about some of the foods and how we've eaten food in the past. Well, what kind of food do you think Adam ate? You know, I think he ate a plant-based diet. We know that Daniel ate a plant-based diet. It doesn't make sense that you create something and eat it. That just doesn't make sense to me. We know that Daniel ate a plant-based diet, and we've looked at the food throughout the years of ancient civilizations. Now, people of the East, Far East, China, there are people that ate predominantly rice, right? Rice. And if you look at the nutrient composition, you know, remember we have three major nutrients in food. We have the proteins, the fats, and the carbohydrates. Well, rice, the ratio of rice as far as proteins, carbohydrates, is, you know, they run in about 10 to 15% fat, 10 to 15% protein. This food is about 70% carbohydrates, starch, carbohydrates. Well, that's what they ate, and they didn't have the chronic disease that we have. Remember the Incans from Peru? They were people that ate potatoes. That's what they lived on. And their nutrient composition of that food was similar. Predominantly carbohydrates. It wasn't made of much fat, it wasn't made of much protein. The Mayans and the Aztecs, remember those cultures in Mexico? They were people that ate corn. And those foods had about the same nutrient composition as rice and potatoes and corn. They're made predominantly of carbohydrates, not too much protein, not too much fat. And this is what the majority of people had to live on. And they did not seem to develop chronic disease. People of the Near East ate lots of grains. So these seem to be the foods that kept people healthy from chronic disease through the ages. Fruits, vegetables, and these seemed to be a key in the nutrient composition of food. I went and visited Caldwell Esselstyn at the Cleveland Clinic, and I run a clinic down in Chattanooga that does the same thing he does at Cleveland, reversing disease. And we've now seen hundreds and hundreds of people with coronary artery disease that's able to at least stabilize it and reverse it with the whole food plant-based diet. This is an article that Caldwell published a few years ago that showed 200 people that had advanced heart disease, and out of all of those people, only one or two of them out of hundreds ever went on to have either a heart attack or a stroke. And these are people that had bypasses and stents, the worst heart disease you could imagine. Now, Caldwell, bless his heart, he's a breast surgeon. He's not a cardiologist. He just sort of found this later in life. But he still does his work at Cleveland Clinic, and he does some great work. But again, he was convincing me that I needed to add this into my regimen. Something from the science was proving this. And now all over, you're hearing about the advantages of a plant-based diet. It got so big recently that they asked me to help out with this movie, Plant Pure Nation, where it goes through. This is the sequel to Forks Over Knives, if someone's familiar with that one. But this was sort of the sequel, but not only did this talk about really how people did in just 10 days of eating a whole food plant-based diet, but it talked about how to get into someone's heart and get them to do it. You know, and sometimes people will do something for 10 days and they feel so good that they never can go back. I use this in my practice, and I call it a jump start, where we give them 10 days and say, listen, you know, we're not saying you're committed to see how you feel in 10 days. Come back, let's check some of your labs, your metrics, see how your body's changed in just 10 days. Remember Daniel and his friends? That's where I think a lot of that good. But anyway, this movie has really, but it also talks about that forces that work against healthy eating. And you know they're out there. The money that's involved, the industry, the government regulations. There's a lot of stuff that makes it hard to do this. So these meals that we've had tonight are just wonderful. Wonderful meals. And whoever's in charge of that, kudos. This is the best ever. So a whole food plant-based diet, I think, is a biblical prescription for life because it changes the chemistry in the body. We have the science to prove it. How we get there is very individualistic. And many people have questions, black and white questions, but there's lots of shades of gray out there. So eating is very individual, and what I add to the mix that my other colleagues don't is some of them are just all about the food. Caldwell Esselstyn won't let any of his patients eat anything that's fat. None. Zero fat. Zero fat. No fat. No fat from even plants even. He doesn't like fat at all. I sort of let people, as long as they don't cross the nutrient composition line of 10 to 15% fat, give them, plant-based fats. And these are people with worse coronary disease. So they either do it or they die. So they're highly motivated. And you know what? My patients have done just as good as his patients in reversing heart disease. And I had one of the success stories, a guy came from Chicago. He had 80% blockage in the left anterior descending, wasn't having symptoms. And in 1 year, it was down to 50%. But it wasn't only about the food. I'm also discovering the brain is just as valuable as the food in treating coronary disease, keeping the stress down, keeping people, part of the way we eat depends on our stress too. So let's go over some biblical prescriptions for life that we talked about that we can, most of you are doing this, but these are ways that you might approach your friends and neighbors with another biblical prescription. One, we've talked about the chronic stress chemistry. So if we think about a biblical prescription for life, remember whether it be light, sunlight, drinking water, eating correctly, a biblical prescription changes every cell in the body, not just one cell. When we exercise, when we move, when we get on the sunlight, when we drink water, when we eat correctly, every cell in the body is involved. Whereas a prescription medicine or modern medicine usually just treats one chemical pathway, and then that pathway can hurt other parts. But a biblical prescription for life doesn't hurt any part of the body. It's a very loving type of way to change a chemistry. Whereas modern medicine might use a chemical prescription for life, we call that reductionism, and that might help one organ, but it might hurt another organ system. I know of no medicine out there that doesn't have a side effect. Everything that we put in our body, including medications, you have to assess the risk versus the benefit. Is me staying in all day, is the risk worth the benefit? Am I working too hard? Is the risk worth the benefit? Everything's about that. And of course, if it's not, if it goes sort of against the way our body design, the stress chemistry takes over. Biblical prescriptions for life really have no side effects. Except, if you call this a side, if you drink too much water, you're going to be going to the bathroom. And if you're speaking up front and you drink too much water and you have to go to the bathroom, it's a little uncomfortable. You notice that the lecture finishes very fast. And if you ever watch TV, the faces look a little bit different. Also, biblical prescriptions for life can and should point us to spiritual truth. Remember, we talked about eating a whole food, plant-based diet, but we want to eat really, the most important food we eat is the bread of life. Now, I want you to follow this. This is important. This is what I talk about that's different than others, and this is what I want you to leave here. The physical affects the spiritual. The spiritual affects the physical. And I'm going to prove the other as we go on today. But as our bodies feel better, the stress chemistry goes down, our brain thinks better, we're better able to communicate and worship with God. Also, as we better communicate and worship with God, it's His saving grace that gives us the power to do things. Now, if we try to have good health just for me, if I'm just going to eat all the right foods and do things just for me, without the spiritual part, that would be termed selfishness. Selfishness damages the body. It puts stress on you when you're chronically selfish. The opposite of selfishness is love. So I can do everything right and still not have health. Are you following me? So that's why as we talk tomorrow about how the brain, the science behind how the brain changes our chemistry. That's why it's important. I want each one of you to realize that they both walk together. So when we worship here together, when you're hearing some of these other speakers, when they're giving you these spiritual truths that are uplifting you, that are relieving your stress, this is going to help your physical and vice versa. So literally, when we come to church, we're coming to a hospital. When we're worshiping, we're changing our physical chemistry. And that chemical physical gives us the power to make changes in our life for the right reasons. Is that clear? Does that make sense? Or sort of make sense? Yeah, I think so. And now we have the technology, again, to prove the physiologic benefits of these biblical prescriptions for life. So I wrapped up a few minutes early. And if there's any questions, you can write them down. And tomorrow I'm going to be talking about the physiology of worship. I talk about all the different things around, from cancer to heart disease to blood pressure to all sorts of things. But of all the seminars I give and talk about, the one I'm going to talk about Sabbath afternoon is my absolute favorite, the physiology of worship. How worship is changing our body. And I'm going to show you on the DNA level and on the physical level how when we worship together, separate than everything else, how it changes our brain, how it helps us grow neurons, how we can balance the stress chemistry. We're going to learn that. We're also going to learn about the treatment, the treatment for stress. How can we lower stress? So I still have some questions from last session that I'm going to get at, and Rick is happy to gab some more. These are some of the best questions I've ever seen. Okay, here's a great question I get. What is the best way to treat inflammation in the body?